I set the photograph on the table and slid it across with one finger. The way you slide a check towards someone who has been pretending the bill was never theirs. It was a notary stamp, photographed and magnified 40 times. The ink had gone the color of a bruise that has started to heal. "Read me the date," I said, out loud. He didn't. That house was mine before I could spell the name of the street it sat on. My grandmother folded a brass key into my 9-year-old hand and closed my fingers over it and told me I was on this house, that I belonged to it and it belonged to me. And a key was how a person knew. By the time the house changed hands, my grandmother could not hold a pen. She could not hold a spoon, and her signature sits on that deed anyway. A clean and confident signature, dated 4 months after the stroke that took her right hand. It was stamped and sworn by a notary whose license had been dead in the ground for 5 months before the day she swore to it. 3 lies in one piece of paper. I would spend years learning to read each one. Today, I read questioned signatures for a living. I am a board certified forensic document examiner. I am the person a court calls when the dead start signing things. When a name appears on a deed that the hand which owned it could not possibly have made. I have testified in 41 counties. I have looked down at 10,000 signatures that were trying to lie to me, and for almost my entire career, there was exactly one file I would not open, one folder tied with string that I kept in a drawer and never untied. It had my grandmother's house in it. It had my own name in it, spelled wrong by somebody else's hand. My name is June Calloway. I am 39 years old. If you have ever been the one your family leaned on for everything and wrote down for nothing, the one who was loved out loud by a single person and erased quietly on paper by everyone else, then I need you to stay with me, because this is the part where the paper finally gets to talk. The most honest lock in that whole house was the one nobody ever bothered to change. It was about to open everything. Let me take you back to the morning. The key stopped working. It was November 13th, 2010, 4 days after we put my grandmother in the ground. 9:40 in the morning, cold enough that the grass at 4012 Sycamore Street still wore frost on the north side of the yard, where the sun hadn't reached. I had a cardboard box folded flat under my arm and a roll of packing tape in my coat pocket. Because I had come for her things, her quilts, her recipe cards, the tin of buttons she let me sort when I was small and couldn't sleep, her stamp albums. I'll tell you the small details, because the small details are the only honest witnesses I have. There was a child's bicycle on the porch that had never been mine, tipped on its side, one wheel still turning a little in the wind. There was a new welcome mat, the bristly kind still stiff from the store, and there was a deadbolt on the front door I had never seen before, brass, bright, tam, unscratched, new. How I had a key, the one she'd closed my fingers over. When I was 9, I'd carried it on a blue Grosgrain ribbon for 30 years, and the ribbon had gone soft and gray as a moth's wing. I fit the key into the new lock, and it slid in 1/4 of an inch and stopped. The way a key stops when it is wandered into a stranger's life. My father opened the door before I could try it again. Raymond Calloway. He held a coffee mug with some company's logo on it, and he looked at me the way a man looks at a delivery he never ordered. Behind him, I could see boxes, but they weren't packing up. They were unpacking, new curtains, half hung, A television, the size of a windshield, leaning against the wall. Sharon's voice somewhere in the back of the house, sweet and busy, telling one of the children to go wash up for lunch. I said I'd come for Nana's things, and my father said the sentence he had been saying to me my whole life, in the same patient, almost gentle voice. The voice a man uses to explain gravity to a child who keeps trying to fly. Junie, he said, your name's not on this house. It never was. If you have ever held a key that suddenly opened nothing, you know there is no sound for it. There is just a small, private rearranging of the world. I stood there and felt 30 years go quiet in my hand. He had a box ready for me. That is the part I never forget. He had already decided what was mine, packed it himself, taped it, and set it by the door. Because a man who has stolen a house will still, somehow, think of himself as generous. It was a banker's box. On the side, in marker, he'd written one word, June. He handed it over the threshold without letting me past it. Inside was almost nothing. A church directory, a set of dish, towels, a coffee can of loose photographs, most of them blurred, and, at the bottom, the one thing he didn't understand the value of, because to him, it was a hobby and a heap of old paper. My grandmother's stamp album, the big green one, fat as a Bible, its spine held together with a rubber band that had baked hard in some attic. I didn't argue. I want you to understand that. I didn't yell. There was a 4-year-old's bicycle 10 feet away, and a new family eating sandwiches in my grandmother's kitchen. And I had learned a long time ago that arguing with Raymond Calloway was like arguing with weather. I took the box. I walked back down the steps. I had run up 10,000 times. I sat in my car at the curb with the heater running and the album on the passenger seat. And I did not open it. I told myself I'd open it when I was ready. It took me 13 years to be ready. By the time I opened that album, I could read every lie they told. But to get there, you have to understand how a family teaches a child she doesn't count. One small lesson at a time. So let me show you the lessons. Not all of them. The 4 that mattered. The first one. I was 9. My mother had been dead 3 years by then. She died when I was 6. I'll spare you the long version. The short version is that she was here, and then she was a folded flag in a casserole schedule. And my father, who was not built for being a father, did the math on his own life and decided a 6-year-old was a line item. So, he left me with his mother. He left me at 412 Sycamore Street with Opal Calloway, and he drove across town and started fresh. New woman, new house, new children. A whole new family assembled like he was finally getting the order right. And here is the thing. Nobody expects. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. My grandmother was the great love of my childhood. She had been the town's postal clerk for 31 years. And she retired the same autumn I came to live with her. So we more or less learned each other from scratch, with nothing but time. She smelled like envelope, glue, and peppermint. She called me Junebug. She taught me to read by handing me her own incoming mail and having me sound out the return addresses. And I learned the whole map of the country off the corners of envelopes before I ever saw a globe. On my 9th birthday, she gave me the key. We were on the back steps shelling peas. She took my hand, set the brass key in my palm, tied the blue ribbon, and said, "This house is going to be yours one day. Junebug, I've already seen to it." So you are going to carry the key now, so your hand knows the weight of it before the day comes. I asked her what seemed to it. She said, "It means I wrote it down. Wrote down beats. Wished. You remember that? Wrote down. Beats wished. For I have built an entire career on the back of that sentence, and I didn't even know it yet. That same year, my father came by for Sunday dinner with his new wife and her children. And at some point, I said something a 9-year-old says. I called it our house, meaning Nana's and mine. And my father set down his fork, and in front of everyone, with no cruelty in his face at all. Only a kind of correction. He said it for the first time. It is Nana's house, Junie. Your name's not on the paper. Sharon smiled at me. It was a sympathetic smile, the kind you give a kid who has gotten above herself. I was 9. I didn't know yet that the paper was a real thing. A thing with a book and a page number. A thing that could be filled in by the right hand or the wrong one. I just knew that there was a paper somewhere, and I wasn't on it. That is the part that hooks into a kid and stays. Because I started watching. I started noticing that the grown-ups around me lived and died by paper. I couldn't see. Stay with me. Because the second lesson is where the paper first reaches for my grandmother's house. And where I find out there is a will. I was 16. 2001. By then, my father's life across town had not gone the way the fresh start was supposed to. There was a business that failed and a second one that was failing. And money had become the weather in his house, the way grief had once been the weather in mine. And one evening, he came to Sycamore Street without the family, sat at Nana's kitchen table, and slid a folder toward her. I was supposed to be doing homework. I was, in fact, doing what I always did, which was listening through the wall and reading the room from the doorway. It was a home equity application. He wanted Nana to borrow against the house. Her house, free and clear, paid off for decades. And lend him the money. He had it all explained, gentle and reasonable. The way he explained everything, and my grandmother, who was the softest woman alive about almost everything, went hard as a doorframe. She said one thing, and she said it once, Raymond. That house goes to Junie. When I am gone, it is in the will. I am not borrowing against her future to pay for your present. It is in the will. There it was. The second time, a will. A real document, somewhere, with my name on it. He didn't get the money. He folded his reasonable folder and left. And at the door, he looked back at me in the hallway. He knew I'd heard, and he didn't say a word. He just looked at me like I was a problem he'd have to solve later, after he left. My grandmother did something I think about constantly now. She took out her stamp album, the big green one, and she sat me down and gave me a lesson that had nothing to do with stamps. She put a magnifier in my hand, a real one, a jeweler's loupe she'd kept from her post office days, and she laid 2 envelopes in front of me, both with the same stamp, both with a postmark. One of these is real, she said, and one of these somebody faked to dodge the postage. Tell me which. I couldn't at first, so she taught me. She taught me to read the cancellation marks, the little circular dates the post office stamps, over a stamp, so it can't be used twice. She showed me how a real postmark and a faked one carry their dates differently. The ink, the pressure, the way an honest date sits square, and a dishonest one sits a hair wrong. And she said, the thing, Junebug. When somebody's lying to you on paper, look for the date that doesn't belong. People are careful about everything, except the dates. The date is where the lie always shows its hand. Look for the date. That doesn't belong. Write that down somewhere because it is going to come back. And when it does, it is going to take a man's whole life apart. I didn't know I was being trained. I thought my grandmother was just teaching me her hobby because she loved it, and she loved me. I know better now. I think some part of her saw the long road ahead, saw her son at her table with his reasonable folder, and decided to put a tool in the hands of the one person she trusted to use it. She was teaching me to read the lie before there was a lie to read. The third lesson, I was 19, and this is the one with my own name on it. This is the one that should make you angry. So, let it. It was 2004. I was 3 states away, the first person in my family to go to college. Working 2 jobs, and living in a dormitory with cinder block walls. My grandmother was still healthy, still herself, still mailing me peppermints in padded envelopes. And one October my father called me, a thing he almost never did, and asked me to sign some forms. It is just paperwork for Nana's affairs, he said. Power of attorney, end of life type stuff. In case something happens, we all need to be on the same page. He wanted to mail them to me to sign. He needed them back fast. I was 19, but I was already my grandmother's granddaughter. I said I'd want a lawyer to look at anything before I signed it. I said it twice. I even put it in an email because something in his voice had the reasonable, gentle quality I had learned to be afraid of, and some instinct told me to leave a trail. I wrote on October 4th, 2004. I have the email. I have had it for 20 years. Dad, I am not signing anything about Nana's house or affairs until a lawyer I trust reads it. Please, don't send it. Let's wait until I am home. And I never signed a thing. 7 days later, on October 11th, 2004, a quitclaim deed was recorded at the Tolliver County Recorder's Office. On it, a person named June M. Calloway gave up, quit, released, abandoned any and all interest she had or might ever have in the property at 412 Sycamore Street. It was signed in a tidy, looping hand. It was notarized by Sharon Calloway. I have no middle name. My grandmother named me, and she named me June. Just June, no middle, because she said a person should have to carry only what is truly theirs. There is no M. There has never been an M. The hand that forged my signature added a letter that was never mine. A letter that didn't belong to make the name look more official, more complete, more real. And in doing that, the forger left, in indelible county ink, the single cleanest proof that I never touched that document. You don't misspell your own name. The lie put a date and a letter where neither belonged, and both of them would one day point straight home. I didn't know that paper existed for almost 20 years. I was 19, 3 states away, refusing to sign, and they simply wrote me in and signed me out, and recorded it, and went on with lunch. Stay with me. The 4th lesson is the worst one, and it is where I lose her. And it is where the deed I showed you at the very beginning gets made. March 3rd, 2009. My grandmother had a stroke. A bad one. It took the right side of her body and most of her words. And the woman who had taught me the whole country off the corners of envelopes could no longer write her own name. The hand that had folded a key into mine could not close around a pen. The doctors were plain about it. There are records. There have been records this whole time, dated, and signed by people with licenses that hadn't expired, that say in clinical language what I am telling you in plain language. As of March 3rd, 2009. Opal Calloway lacked the physical and cognitive capacity to execute legal documents. Full stop. On June 14th, 2009, 103 days later, a warranty deed was signed. On it, Opal Calloway, of sound mind, and by her own hand, granted and conveyed the property at 412 Sycamore Street to her son, Raymond Calloway, for the stated sum of $10 and other good and valuable consideration. The signature was clean, confident, the signature of a woman with a steady right hand, and all her words. It was notarized and sworn by Sharon Calloway. It was recorded in Book 1147, page 308, on August 2nd, 2009. My grandmother lived another 15 months in a care facility, mostly silent, while her son and his family unpacked their lives into her front room. She died on November 9th, 2010. I learned about the small graveside service after it had happened. I learned it from a sympathy card a neighbor sent me. Assuming I'd been there, I had not been told. I want to say that as flatly as I can, because there is no dressing it up. They held my grandmother's funeral and didn't tell me, because by then I was a loose end. And you don't invite a loose end to a knot you are trying to tie. And 4 days after that, I drove to Sycamore Street with a folded box, and the key didn't fit. And a man with a coffee mug handed me a banker's box and told me my name wasn't on the paper. And I sat at the curb with my grandmother's stamp album on the passenger seat and did not open it. That was the bottom. I am not going to pretend it wasn't. If you were ever the one a family kept but never wrote down, the one who was loved by a single person and erased on paper by all the rest, then do me one favor before I go on. Comment. One word below. Erased. I read them. Every single one. It matters, more than I can tell you, to know I wasn't the only one sitting at that curb. Now let me tell you how a person climbs out of a curb. And let me tell you about the one human being who reached down. For a couple of years after, I did what survival looks like, which is to say, it looks like nothing. I waited tables in a town where nobody knew my name. I rented a room with a hot plate and a window that looked at a brick wall. I paid my own way through a state college at night. 2 classes a semester, because that was all I could carry on top of the shifts. I want to be honest. There was no grand plan in those years. There was rent, and there was the next shift. And there was a green stamp album I moved from apartment to apartment and never once opened, because I wasn't ready, and because some part of me was afraid of what my grandmother might have left inside it for a granddaughter who hadn't even shown up to bury her. The plan, when it finally came sideways. I took a forensic science elective to fill a requirement, and one week a guest lecturer came in, an old man, gruff, with reading glasses pushed up into white hair, and a way of holding a document up to the light, like it owed him money. His name was Theodore Brandt. He was a board-certified forensic document examiner, 30 years in, and he spent 90 minutes showing a room of bored undergraduates how to tell a true signature from a false one, how a forger's pen moves too slowly because the forger is drawing a picture of a name instead of writing one, how the truth is always in the small things, the lift, the pressure, the tremor a real hand makes and a fake one forgets. I stayed after. I asked questions for an hour, and at the end he looked at me over those glasses and asked why I cared so much. And I don't know why I told a stranger, except that he had the kind of stillness my grandmother used to have. I told him there was a document somewhere with my name on it, that I knew I hadn't signed. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer advice or outrage. That is the thing about the one good person you get. He didn't try to fix it. He just nodded slowly. And he said, "The thing I have remembered for the rest of my life. The forger's already long gone by the time the deed reaches us." He said, "Doesn't matter. The paper stayed. The paper always stays. Your whole job, if you ever take it up, is to be the one who finally sits down and lets it talk. Be the one who stays long enough to be read to. Be the one who stays." I had spent my whole life being the one who was made to leave. I think that is the exact moment I decided what I was going to be. He took me on as an apprentice the next year. For the better part of a decade, he taught me everything. Court protocol, the literature, the ethics, the unglamorous discipline of it. He taught me that our work has one sacred rule above all others. And the rule is that you never, ever bend the method to reach the answer you want. You follow the procedure flawlessly. Every time. Even when it would be so easy not to. Because the moment you cut one corner, you've become the thing you are hunting. We don't catch liars by lying better. He told me, we catch them by being the only ones in the room who didn't. Those apprenticeship years were the best education of my life, and the hardest, because every case was somebody's worst day, handed to me as a stack of exhibits. My first solo testimony was a contested will, 2 counties north, 2 sisters fighting over a deathbed amendment. And I sat in the witness box and watched a lawyer try to fluster me, and felt, for the first time, the strange steadiness of being the most prepared person in the room. I read the paper. I let the paper do the rest. I won it. Quietly. Then there was a forged pension beneficiary, and a refinance built on a signature that wasn't one, and a power of attorney doctored with a second pen. You could see the moment you tilted it, under a raking light. I got faster. I got surer. Somewhere in there I stopped being a woman things were done to, and became a woman who reads what was done. To anyone, to everyone. In flat black ink that doesn't care who is crying. When it is finally read aloud, I got my certification. I built a practice. High espionnes. I testified, and got good at the long quiet stare a forger gives you from the defense table. When they realize you've seen the thing they hoped no one would, I moved out of the room with the brick wall window. I saved money, carefully, the way you save when you've learned that wrote down beats wished for. And in all of it, in all those years, in all those counties, there was one folder I never untied. The green stamp album sat on a shelf in my home office. And I told myself the same thing I'd told myself at the curb. I'd open it when I was ready. If you have ever owned the one thing that could set you free, and been too afraid to look inside it, you understand. The fear isn't that you'll find nothing. The fear is that you'll find everything. And then you'll have to do something about it. There was a night, maybe 5 years after she died, when I almost did. I took the green album down off the shelf and sat with it in my lap for a long while. I got as far as the first page, her own handwriting on the inside cover. The careful postal clerk print where she'd kept an inventory of her own collection. And I closed it again. I couldn't. Some part of me knew that looking closely was a thing I would not be able to undo. And I wasn't ready to not be able to undo it. I told Mr. Brandt about it the next week, a little ashamed. The way you confess something you think makes you a coward. He didn't tell me to be brave. He didn't tell me to open it. He just nodded, slow, and said 2 words, "It'll keep." And it did. It kept for 13 years in the dark behind the last page, exactly the way she'd left it, waiting until I was finally the kind of person who could look. Then, in the spring of 2023, a box arrived, and the box made me ready. Here is where it turns, so stay with me. It came from a name I barely knew, Wren Calloway. My half-sister, the youngest of Sharon's children. She would have been a toddler on a tipped-over bicycle the morning of the curb. She was 22 now, and I had met her maybe 4 times in my life. Inside was a banker's box and a note in young, careful handwriting. The note said only this: I was helping pack up Mom's office. She is not well. I found these in a box with your name on a folder. I don't know the whole story, but I think these were always supposed to be yours. Wren. Sharon had run a little notary and tax prep business out of a strip mall for 20 years, and now, retiring and ill, she was closing it down. And her youngest daughter, the one innocent person in the whole machine, the one who'd been a baby while it all happened, had found a folder with my name on it, and instead of asking her parents, had quietly mailed it to a half-sister. She barely knew. I want you to hold on to Wren, because she is the only warm thing in this story. And she is the reason there is an ending at all. I opened her box first, and then, finally that same night, at my kitchen table, I took down the green stamp album and undid the rubber band that had been holding it shut. For 13 years, I am going to walk you through what I found, the way I found it, one page at a time, because that is how it landed on me. And each page raised the stakes on the one before. The first thing, from Wren's box, was a stack of certified copies, the recorded documents themselves, the ones Sharon had kept for her files. The 2004 quitclaim with June M. Calloway. In that tidy, looping hand, the 2009 warranty deed, opal to Raymond, signed 103 days after the stroke. And a third document I hadn't even known existed, an affidavit, recorded March 22nd, 2011, in which Raymond Calloway, acting under the durable power of attorney granted by Opal Calloway, corrected a clerical error in the legal description of the property to clean up the title, recorded in March of 2011, sworn under a power of attorney from a woman who had died in November of 2010. A power of attorney dies with the person who grants it. The instant my grandmother died, that power turned to ash. He used it 4 months after she was in the ground. The document is void on its own face. You don't even need an expert to see it. You need a calendar. That was the first page. And I already knew I was looking at a crime, but I am an examiner. I don't go on knowing. I go on proof. So I picked up the loupe, my grandmother's loupe, the same jeweler's glass she'd handed me at 16, and I went to work on the notary stamp on that 2009 deed, the one I would, a year later, slide across a table to my father and tell him to read out loud. A notary stamp carries a date, too, not the date of signing. The date the notary's own commission expires. It is stamped right there in the seal, by law, so anyone can check that the notary was actually licensed on the day they swore the oath. I read Sharon's. Her commission expiration date, pressed right there into the ink, January 31st, 2009. The deed was notarized June 14th, 2009. She had sworn a sacred oath under a seal, with a license that had expired 4.5 months before. The seal that was supposed to make the document official was itself the confession, the date that didn't belong. I sat very still, I could hear my grandmother. Look for the date that doesn't belong. People are careful about everything. Except the dates. But the dates were only half of what that box held. There were the signatures, too. And I had something almost nobody on earth had. 30 years of the genuine article. I keep a shoebox. I have kept it since I was a girl. Every padded envelope and dime, store postcard my grandmother ever mailed me. Every one of them addressed in her own steady hand. Every June bug written out in the blue ballpoint she bought by the dozen. I carried the box to the kitchen table and laid the 2009 deed down beside 30 years of her real handwriting. And I read them against each other under the loupe. A genuine signature breathes. Hers climbed and dipped the way a hand does when it has been writing the same name for decades. The little lift coming out of the capital, the waver and the long stroke. The place she always bore down, and the place she always let up. The name on that deed did none of it. It was even. It was careful. It was drawn slow and whole by someone who had studied my grandmother's signature until they could copy its shape, but had never once lived inside it. It was a tracing of a woman, not the woman herself. I had been holding the proof in a shoebox for 13 years and calling it keepsakes. Then I opened Wren's box the rest of the way, and underneath the certified copies was the thing I think Wren didn't even understand she was sending. Sharon's notary journal. The logbook. Every notary is required by law to keep one. A bound book where you record every single notarization. The date, the document, the signer. Often a thumbprint. It is the one record a notary cannot revise after the fact because it is bound and sequential. I turned to the summer of 2009. There was an entry for June 12th. There was an entry for June 16th. There was no entry for June 14th. For the single most consequential notarization of her life, the one that handed her family a house. Sharon Calloway had made no journal entry at all. My grandmother taught me to find the date that doesn't belong. She never told me that sometimes the loudest date in the room is the one that is missing. The gap in that journal, between the 12th and the 16th, was a hole shaped exactly like a guilty conscience. You don't forget to log the notarization that changes your family's fortune. You skip it on purpose, because writing it down would mean writing down a date your license couldn't cover. And then I turned the album's last page, my grandmother's album, and tucked into the back cover, flat behind the final leaf of stamps, was a folded sheet of heavy paper that wasn't a stamp at all. It was her will, a signed original, dated February 9th, 2006, 3 years before the stroke, when she was sharp as a tack and strong as a fence post. Witnessed, dated, in order, and in the plain, unmistakable language people use when they want to be sure. It read, I give and devise the real property located at 412 Sycamore Street, together with all of its contents, to my beloved granddaughter, June Calloway. No middle initial, just June. The way she named me. And folded inside the will in her own hand. The steady hand, the pre-stroke hand, a hand I would know anywhere on this earth. A note, Junebug. If you are reading this, it means you finally looked close. The way I taught you, I always knew you would. The lawyer who keeps the other copy is Marcus Vandermeer. On Court Street, wrote down beats, wished for you were always on this house. Love, Nana. That is the one time I told you at the beginning there would be exactly one. I sat alone at my kitchen table at 1:15 in the morning. a 38-year-old woman who catches liars for a living, and I cried until I couldn't see the page, alone. No one to perform it for. Just me and the green album and a dead woman's handwriting, telling me I was always on the house. She had hidden it where she knew only a careful reader would ever find it. Behind the stamps, behind the loop, behind a skill she'd put in my hands at 16 precisely, so that one day I could find what she'd left. She didn't just leave me the house. She left me the means to take it back. She had been protecting my worth in a place where they'd never think to look. That album was never a hobby. It was the record someone kept in secret of exactly how much I was worth to her. I cried once. Then I wiped my face, and I never cried again. Not through any of what came next, because what came next wasn't grief, it was procedure. If you have ever waited years for the proof that the careful, quiet ones get there in the end. Stay with me and subscribe if you want to be in the room when it lands. Because we have arrived at the part where it lands. Here is what I did not do. I did not call my father and scream. I did not drive to Sycamore Street and make a scene on the new welcome mat. I did not post a word of it anywhere. I had spent 10 years learning from Theodore Brandt that you never bend the method to reach the answer. And now I had the chance to prove I'd actually listened. So, I did it right. I did it so flawlessly that there was no door left for them to walk back out of. First, and this is the rule I would not break, I did not appoint myself the expert on my own case. I am not allowed to. An examiner cannot serve as the neutral expert in a matter where she is the injured party. The conflict would taint the finding. And frankly, it would let a forger off the hook on a technicality. So, I did the opposite of what my anger wanted. I boxed up the documents and I sent them, blind, to a board-certified colleague 3 states away who had never heard the name Calloway. A man whose work I'd opposed in court twice and respected both times. I asked him for an independent examination, by the book, with no thumb of mine. On any scale, his report came back 4 weeks later. The 2009 signature was, in his professional opinion, not made by the same hand as Opal Calloway's known exemplars. The 2004 June M. Calloway signature was a simulation. He didn't know it was my house or my name. He just read the paper exactly the way Mr. Brandt said it would one day let someone read it. Second, I went to Marcus Vandermeer on Court Street, the lawyer from the note, who was older now but still practicing, and who remembered my grandmother, and who had wondered for 13 years why the granddaughter named in the will he'd drafted had simply vanished. I retained a quiet title attorney. We opened my grandmother's estate. Late. Yes, but the law makes room for fraud that hid itself, because the clock on a concealed fraud doesn't start until the day you could reasonably have found it. And I found it the night Wren mailed me a box. We filed to set aside the 2009 deed and the 2011 affidavit. We filed a complaint with the Secretary of State's Notary Division, and every single thing we filed was built not on my outrage, but on the antagonist's own paperwork, and on procedure, followed without a flaw. The system's own rules, turned to face the people who'd hidden behind them. Third, and only third, after everything was filed and could not be unfiled, I went to see my father one time. Hi, ma'am. I'll tell you exactly how it went. Because this is the quiet reckoning, and it has no shouting in it at all. We met at a diner, neutral ground. His choice. He came in with the same patient, gentle face, ready, I think, to manage me the way he'd managed me my whole life. I had a folder. I set the magnified photograph of the notary stamp on the table and slid it across with one finger. Read me the date, I said, out loud. He didn't, so I read it to him, and then I laid it out. Not as an argument, but as a list. I didn't raise my voice once. I numbered it. Because numbers don't shake, I said, first. My grandmother could not hold a pen on June 14th, 2009. There are medical records, dated and signed, that say so. Her signature on that deed was made by someone else's hand. And an independent examiner, with no idea who any of us are, has said so in writing. I said, second. The notary who swore that signature was true had a license that expired on January 31st, 2009. The proof is pressed into her own stamp. The Secretary of State has the same record. It is public. Anyone can pull it. I said, third. The affidavit you recorded in March of 2011 was sworn under a power of attorney from a woman who died in November of 2010. That document was void. The day you signed it, you don't need an expert for that one. You need a calendar. I said, fourth. There is a quitclaim deed with my name on it, signed 7 days after I put in writing that I would never sign it. From 3 states away, the forger spelled my name with a middle initial I have never had. You don't misspell your own name. That signature is not mine, and the fact that you forged a release out of me at all means you knew. You have always known that the house was mine to release. And then I said the last thing, and it was the only thing in the whole list that wasn't a fact about a document. I said, you spent 30 years telling me my name wasn't on the paper. You were wrong on the one paper that matters. I've read all of yours. Now, I am not here to argue with you. I am here so that you hear it from me, before you hear it from the county. It is already filed, he said, Junie, in the old gentle voice, reaching for the reasonable folder he didn't have anymore. And I stood up, and I left $12 on the table for the coffee. And I walked out, and for the first time in my life, I was the one who got to be the one who leaves. Now let me tell you what landed. Because cold doesn't mean nothing happens. Cold means it all happens, on the record, in flat ink, where it can never be taken back. The court's order ran 4 pages. 1 sentence mattered. The warranty deed dated June 14th, 2009, was declared void from its inception. Void from the very beginning, as though it had never been signed. Because in the eyes of the law, it never truly was. With that deed gone, and the void affidavit gone with it, the house fell back into my grandmother's estate, where it had always belonged, and her 2006 will, the one she'd hidden behind the stamps, did exactly what she'd promised me on the back steps. When I was 9, it gave 412 Sycamore Street to her granddaughter, June Calloway. No middle initial. The county recorder issued a new deed. There is exactly one name on it. It is mine. It is the only name that was ever really on that house. He spent 30 years telling me my name wasn't on the paper. Now, his isn't. Mine is the only one that ever was. Then there was the money, and I want to show you the arithmetic, because I do everything slowly now and out loud. The way you check a thing you can't afford to get wrong. After they took the house, they didn't even live in it. They rented it out. From February of 2012 to January of 2024, they collected rent on my grandmother's house from strangers at $1,100 a month, so I sat down and I did the math. from February 2012 to January 2024 is 12 years. 12 years is 144 months. 144 months at $1,100 a month is $158,400. I checked it twice. The court checked it a third time. The judgment ordered Raymond Calloway to disgorge $158,400 in rents. He had no right to collect on a house that was never legally his. The county assessor had the place on the books at $260,000. He'd traded his own mother's memory and his daughter's inheritance for a strip mall life and a rental check. And now he owed back every dollar of the check and had lost the house besides. There were people living in my grandmother's house when all of this came down. A young couple with a baby, 3 years into a lease, who had never been told that the place they were raising a child in had been stolen before they ever signed a thing. None of it was theirs to answer for. So I let the lease run out its last 4 months on its own terms, and I paid for their move on top of it. Because I had spent my whole life on the wrong end of people who called cruelty a balance sheet. And I was not going to become one in order to win. When they were ready, they left, and the house stood empty for the first time in 12 years. As for the money, my father did not have $158,400 sitting in a drawer. So the court did the thing courts do. It turned the judgment into a lien. It fastened the debt to his name, his wages, and whatever he owns, and it will follow him quietly, year after year, until it is paid in full, however long that takes. My grandmother used to say, wrote down beats, wished for. My father had his own version of that. If your name wasn't on the paper, he believed, you weren't owed a thing. And he spent 30 years making sure the paper never once carried mine. In the end, he got something of his own put in writing. It sits in the one ledger he can never talk his way out of. It has his name on it, and it is not going anywhere. The Secretary of State's letter was shorter than the court order. It used one word that the court hadn't. Sharon Calloway's notary commission was revoked, and the written finding described her conduct as fraudulent. That word is on a public record. Now, permanent. Searchable, attached to her name, for as long as records last. A woman who had built a small business, stamping her seal on other people's important moments, will have, at the bottom of her professional life, a state finding that she stamped a lie onto a dying woman's house. Anyone can pull it. People do. And the people who'd handed me a banker's box and a closed door, they reacted. The way the master of any house reacts when the locks finally answer to someone else. My father left voicemails, 11, in the first month. I saved them because saving things is what I do. They started reasonable, the way he always starts. Then they got smaller. There was one where he said, and I am quoting it exactly because I've heard it enough times to have it by heart, after everything this family did for you. I let that one sit in the saved folder, Yoon answered, next to a forged quitclaim and a missing journal entry. And I thought, yes, after everything. There was a guilt email from Sharon with a subject line about moving forward as a family. And not one word of apology inside it. I didn't answer that either. The only message I ever returned was my father's last one. The one where he fell all the way back to the beginning and said, tired and bitter, your name was never on that house, Junie. I sent back 6 words, it is the only name on it now. Then I blocked the number, and I have not heard his voice since, and the quiet has been the cleanest thing I own. That is the verdict, not a scream. A record. Uh, every stolen year. On the public ledger, to the dollar, and to the date. But I promised you this wasn't a story about getting a family back. And it isn't. So let me tell you how it actually ends. Because the ending is smaller and truer than revenge. And it is the part I'd keep, if I could only keep one. I got the house back. And the first thing I did before I moved a single box in was drive out to Sycamore Street and walk around to the back door. The one off the kitchen, where my grandmother and I had shelled peas on the steps. Because here is the thing I'd worked out. The thing I'd half known since I was 9 years old, standing at a new deadbolt. When my father changed the locks, he changed the front, the bright brass deadbolt. The one my old key wandered into and stopped. He never touched the back. Why would he? The back door was just the kitchen door. The family door, the unimportant one, the most honest lock in that whole house, was the one nobody ever bothered to change. I took the brass key off the blue ribbon. The ribbon soft and gray as a moth's wing now, 30-some years on, and I fit it into the back door, and it turned. First, try. The key my grandmother folded into a 9-year-old's hand, and the lock she'd installed herself. Finding each other again across all of it. Like the house had been keeping one door honest the whole time. Waiting for the rightful reader to come around the back. The key that had opened nothing for 13 years had. It turned out, always opened the truest door in the place. I stood in my grandmother's kitchen with the cold coming off the linoleum, and my hand still on the knob. And I did not cry. I'd already done that. I just breathed in the place where the most loved years of my life had happened. And I let myself be home. And there is one more thing. The one warm thread I get to keep. I called Rin, the half-sister who'd been a baby on a tipped-over bicycle, who'd grown up inside that family, and still, when she found a folder with a stranger's name on it, chose to do the honest thing without being asked. I didn't owe her anything. Blood that never wrote me down doesn't get to claim me. But she hadn't claimed me. She'd just told the truth. The way my grandmother told the truth. The way I'd built a whole life on telling the truth. And that is a thing worth answering. So, I had her out to the house. We sat on the back steps, the honest side, and shelled peas out of a bag from the store. Because I didn't know how else to do it. And I told her about Opal, about the post office and the peppermints, and the loop and the date that doesn't belong. She got to know her grandmother a little, through me, even though the family that raised her had never once said the woman's name. I gave Ren the Green Stamp album. It seemed right. The record someone kept of how much a granddaughter was worth. Passed to the one person young enough and honest enough to keep it clean. If your name was ever left off the paper, if you were the one a family kept and never wrote down, then I need you to hear the last thing. And I need you to actually believe it. They can keep you off the paper your whole life. They can change the locks and pack your box and decide you are a loose end and not even tell you when the woman who loved you is put in the ground. But paper outlives the people who lie on it. That is the whole job. Wrote down beats wished for, my grandmother said, and she meant it as comfort. But it turned out to be a weapon, because the thing they wrote down to erase me was the exact thing that proved I'd been there all along. The forger's date that didn't belong. The notary's expired seal. The middle initial that was never mine. The journal entry that was missing. They wrote their own confession in the act of writing me out. And then they handed it to a banker's box. And the banker's box waited 13 years for someone careful enough to read it. I was the one who stayed long enough to be read to. My name is June Calloway. No. Middle initial. It is on the house. It was always on the house. And if you've ever held a key that opened nothing, go around the back. Try the door. Nobody thought was worth changing. Sometimes the truest lock in the whole place has been quietly waiting for you the entire time, keeping one honest way in until the rightful reader finally comes home.